Hey, what's poppin', you guys? Sizzle here, and I'm about to finally swap off of kdenlive just to kind of try out other video editors. After having used it for, I think, 2 or 3 years at this point, every single one of my YouTube videos up until, 2024, and even a good amount of them at the start of 2024, were all made edited with kdenlive. It's a great open source video editor available on all platforms, Mac OS, Linux, Windows, like whatever. And yeah, let's go boot it up, and this is going to be like a beginner's guide of like how to use it, and kind of a more advanced guide of just more useful things to know, things I've learned as I've used this editor, and things I've found useful. So the first thing you'll notice is this is a fresh boot. I actually haven't done anything here. This fresh boot probably looks a little bit different to you. That's mainly because if you go to View, you can disable or enable things. I think Library is enabled by default or something, and so is like something else, Clip Monitor. I believe these are normally enabled and like in different places. You can first off drag things out of their menu, drag them around wherever you want to have them. I think if I hit editing, this is the default that everybody else gets, something like this. But I don't ever use the Clip Monitor, so I disabled that. And I don't ever use the library, so I disabled that. And I also liked having it where my effects and compositions are both in kind of their own area, so I drag them around. Or you can just drag things around, resize things really, really easily. And more importantly, you'll also notice I have a few audio and video tracks, and also if you look up here, it says 1080p 60 FPS, which is not the standard default thing that it has selected. So to change these settings, we go to Project Settings, I believe. Yeah, Project Settings, you could set the FPS to 60. Most of the time you want 60 FPS if you're recording 60 FPS, otherwise do the 30. Everything else is kind of unnecessary. Unless you're doing like animation, then you do 24. But everybody else, you do 60. You can hit configure here to try and change things. If you don't want like what they have here, the defaults will work fine for me forever. But if you don't, you can hit this little page icon and it'll make a new profile with a new description, a new like name. And you can change whatever you want about it. So I could do 60 frames per 2 or something, which is effectively 30 FPS or stuff like that. I'm not going to do that though, because 1080p 60 FPS is the standard on YouTube. That's what you should be using to render your projects. To set a default project thing, you do that in Settings, Configure kdenlive, and Project Defaults. You notice I have it set to just the 1080p 60 FPS. I have it set to 2 video tracks, because you have 1 video track for your video, and a second video track for any edits you're going to do, right? So any images you're going to have in, anything like that, you'll need a second video track for. And you'll also notice I have 3 audio tracks, and that's more to do with my recording settings. Whenever I record footage for a video, I actually have 3 different audio tracks, one of them with my mic, one of them with like gameplay and whatnot, and one of them with like Discord. Right, so I actually did like a little test recording, if you guys didn't see on the desktop earlier, specifically to go use with this, which I will go drag in right now. Another cool thing about kdenlive is its support for native MKV files, which is very, very convenient. So let's go in our project bin, drag in our test footage, and give it a sec to load. It'll load all of the audio tracks. That's why this loads multiple times. If you just have 1 audio track, it should just load the first time, then it'll be loaded. But here, it's now loaded in. We can go drag it in, and you can see I have the footage. I have my 3 audio tracks, and it's just like that. The third audio track, by the way, completely empty because I wasn't on a Discord call or anything while I was doing this. But more just so I have footage to kind of use, right, and use with stuff that I'm going to go show off. Either way, that's why I have my project defaults like that. I don't believe I've even changed anything else in here. I'll go through it real quick like I am right now, just in case. But I'm 90% sure this is all default. But even this transcode thing here, I don't even know what this really does. But even this is default, right? The only thing I change is the project's defaults here. Like I said, to find this, you can set FPS to 60. If you don't want to do that, scroll into the full HD 1080, and that's where you'll find that. For 2K on YouTube, it's one of these. So I think this works. Yep, 2560 x 1440, 2K 60 FPS. And if you want to do 4K, use UHD. That's what YouTube uses. Right here, 3840 by 2160. That is 4K on YouTube. And I even have a little custom thing that I made on my own with a custom resolution I called like square or something. I forgot what I called it. Yeah, right. So to get squares on YouTube, you want to do 1086 by 1080. And if you want to have it even bigger, right? So this is like 2K, for example, 2172 x 2160. I think this is actually 4K. And this is how I do those like square music video things. I've had a few of those up on my channel, mainly for the AI covers. I do stuff like this. And that's all the project defaults. That's, before you get started editing, what you should have going on. When you're actually doing the editing, depending on the computer you're doing it on, you will not be able to render in 1:1. I can't even render in 1:1 most of the time when I do my edits. So in the project monitor in the bottom left here, you can turn it down. I actually do most of my editing in 360p. It runs like lightning fast while I edit, and then it'll still render just fine at the end. So yeah, now you're probably wondering, how do I actually edit this footage? And the main thing you want to do is cut stuff, cut stuff, delete stuff. And I actually have memorized at this point the Shift R here to cut clip. It's natural for me. I'm like, oh, I just want to go cut the footage, I don't know, right here. Shift R, Shift R, Shift R, Shift R. And now I have 4 little segments I can drag around however I want. If you have stuff that's stuck together like this, for example, the one video footage with 3 audio tracks, well, I don't really need this 3rd audio track, so I can right click, ungroup clips, and now they're all separate things. So I can go delete this one, and now that that's deleted, I can put these together by holding down Shift and then clicking these to kind of group them together, and then hit group clips. And now if I click back on them, they're back together, but we're missing that bottom part. And if you want to do that to everything, just hold Shift while clicking to select multiple things. Right, so I was Shift and drag there, ungroup clips, Shift and drag here, the delete button to delete stuff, Shift and drag here, and we can go group these together. But now this is all grouped together, right? So you don't want that. You'll have to like manually go and group each one separately, just like normal. But there you go. You can see that's how you kind of cut footage. If it wasn't obvious, that's how you also drag stuff around. Just like left click to drag stuff. Pretty cut and dry. Yeah, to like make this stuff smaller or bigger, you can move it around. I already mentioned that. To make these smaller or bigger, you can drag them up and down, right? So if you really need to know what you're looking at, you can make this really big. I generally don't, so I have them, pretty much like default, like as small as possible. Yeah, right. That's how you kind of cut stuff, move stuff, delete stuff. You could hit the delete key or right click any of this stuff, and these options are somewhere, right? Group, ungroup, delete effects. We haven't gone there yet. Delete selected item. Change the speed. That's actually a useful one. So let's say, I don't know, I thought this footage was too slow. If I hit change speed on the clip, and it's only where you have your mouse. So even though this is all grouped together, it's only going to change the speed of the video. So if I do change speed, I could either do, like let's say 400%. That's a pretty common one. Or I could even set the exact duration. So let's say I have 6 seconds of footage that I need to make 5 seconds of footage or something, right? I could literally type it in. Or let's say I want to make this exactly 20 seconds, right? So we like 20:00, hit OK, and you'll see it picked the customized number for us, 29.08, to make it that long. When you're using audio, it's also important to use pitch compensation to make the audio actually sound normal, and reverse clip will just reverse the clip. But yeah, now you'll see, right, the footage is faster, but I guess you guys can't really hear this. But you'll notice the audio didn't get faster. You actually have to go hit change speed on each of the audios as well, and type that in as well so that they're all the same. I don't really know if there's a way around that. I never figured it out because this is a pretty unused feature for me. I've used it a few times, a handful of times, and beyond that I haven't used it at all. But make sure also when you're doing audio, like I said, pitch compensation so that the audio doesn't sound like a chipmunk. Yeah. Won't sound perfect, sped up audio generally won't, but it'll at least sound decent with pitch compensation. Then next up we have compositions, and I don't actually know what 99% of these do. If you do a lot more video editing, you can look into all these. I'm sure all these are useful in their own way. The only composition I almost ever use is wipe, and use this as a video transition. And to do a video transition, let me use scroll wheel here. I'm pressing Control and the scroll wheel to zoom in here. All right, let me zoom out a little bit, zoom back in. To actually do a transition, you just drag the wipe between 2 clips. This little red bar will kind of show up as you're about to drop it in. Like if I'm putting it here, you'll see it's not there. If I put it there, red bars there. Now I can let go of it. And then you just click on it, and you can change the wipe method to any method you want. Right, so you can have like this little thing. You can see here, right? It's pretty hard to see in the video editor, but there was technically a transition there. The problem is I'm using footage that goes directly into itself. So if I click on this, right, this little editing thing, I can now delete it real quick, and let's just like go forward in the footage or something, right? Delete that. Let's add in that same transition so it's actually noticeable, and do like, I don't know, double iris. Yeah, there you go. Now you can see there is something there. It's pretty hard to see the transitions during rendering, especially when they're this small. You can drag them out like this to kind of decide which side it should transition to choose slower or faster. Or you could even, change it here. There's a duration thing, this position, invert, revert. I don't really mess with this beyond just changing the method. Speaking of which, you'll notice I probably have way more methods than you, and that's because I downloaded a few of them. I don't exactly remember where I did that. Let me see if I can find it. Right, I think it was just this download button. Yep. That download button right there. When you're in the compositions menu, you can download a bunch of this stuff, and I did download a bunch of this stuff, everything with a green check mark. I just hit the download button on, and it started working, which is great. It's let me had a lot more variety in my transitions and videos. Right, then this is pretty much all I ever use composition for. Like I said, if you're maybe more of a video editor, I'm sure stuff like UV map or whatever might be more useful for you, but for me personally, this wipe thing is the only thing I ever need. So what I did is I right-clicked and I hit add to favorites. Now I can just go to this menu and I can see my wipe, and I guess compose and transform. It's just there, right? Speaking of which, we can go to effects. You could see there's way more effects. Everything has like its own sub-menu. Every sub-menu has its own, high amount of stuff. But if you go to my favorites, you can see there's only a few things here, because honestly, this is pretty much all that you need. You want volume for sure, right? That's under volume and dynamics. You can see volume is great. Transform, under transform, the story's perspective. You also want crop, and this thing at the top here is a search bar, so we type in crop. You see there's even a few different crops, but crop, scale, and tilt, generally the one I use. And then you have to unsearch it, because you can search while you're in favorites and stuff. And then lift, gamma, gain. You could also technically download effects from here, and I know I've used like a glitch effect or something from here before, but I found this to be a lot more finicky, and I haven't really been able to ever use this stuff. But yeah, mainly transform and volume are like the big two effects that I ever use. So let me just drag these apart. You'll notice it actually got rid of the transition thing because they got split apart just automatically. You don't really have to worry about that, like any good video editor would. But let's just change a few things, right? So let's first off, volume, pretty straightforward, right? I go to this footage and I drag the volume onto the footage. There's like a little plus thing there. You let go and it adds it over in the effects/composition menu over here. And you can just turn it up, or you can max out the gain. You can make it much quieter. You could go anywhere in between. Cool thing is you could also have the audio kind of transition its way up. So let's say I wanted to start, quiet. I want to go at this point, right, hit this little thing to do a keyframe. Now you change the value to make it quieter. Then you can go here and you can make it louder again. You'll notice here on the bottom, right, it starts there, gets quieter, gets louder, right? That's exactly what it's doing. And now that you've added these, now you can drag them in the UI as well. As far as I know, there's no way to just do that outright. Like, I can't just click the middle one and start doing that. But if I go in the middle one, I drag in a volume, I add like one keyframe, all of a sudden I can do that, but only with the points I added. So if I want to add another one, you could also just click on here in the timeline to get a thing in here, or type in the exact value, as I actually oftentimes do, to go add one as well. And you can use that to kind of change the volume of things and have the volume kind of fade up or down. But if you're just trying to fade in or fade out audio or video, you'll notice as I hover near the edge in the top left of all these and in the top right of all these, something shows up. If you click and drag that out, that is a fade out, right? So here, it kind of would just fade out, right? Useful. And here, if I do the same thing in the front, it'll fade in. And it'll do the same thing with audio. And if I click on the video here, you'll see it now has a fade in and fade out with different durations. Super, super useful kind of shortcut for video editing. Then there's transform. This is my most used thing by far. If I drag this into video, you'll see we have a lot going on here, right? We can change our X and Y. So let me delete the fades for now so you can actually see the footage. You can see we have our X and Y, our coordinates, our width and our height of the video. We have the size of the entire thing. So if I do 200%, it gets bigger, and that's how you can do zooms and stuff, is by just making the size bigger. The opacity, so like how see-through it is, right? So if I do 50% and I had something behind here or something, then that would be useful. So let me actually just grab this footage and put it on top, and let's put, kind of show off that transform. Whatever's on top is what's rendered first, by the way. But if I go here and I set the opacity like 20%, you can kind of see there's some very weird thing, because the footage is very similar, so the overlap is going to be hard to notice. But you can see right here, right, that really faint Mercy thing just sitting there. Mercy is the character from the game that footage is from, not really important here. But you can see that's there. That's actually from the footage on top. It's useful when the footage is a bit more different, but because all my footage is so similar, can't really show it off all that well. But opacity can be used. You can rotate the video. You can see now it's rotated and opacity. And you have keyframes here as well. You click at any point, or you could be like over here, right? Do that, do that. And what will happen between the changes is it will slowly change that value. So if you ever want something to quickly just go from one value to another, you need those keyframes to be like right next to each other, because otherwise, as you're about to see, what will happen is the opacity will slowly change and it will slowly rotate, right? Because it's going from this keyframe to the next one and changing the values in between. And that's kind of the whole point. You can see it's getting lighter and lighter, and it's turning as it goes. And it just kind of keeps going until it reaches the point it wants to. Right, so that's important to recognize with any keyframe. That's true for the sound ones as well. But keyframes are extremely useful in video editing. Then the other one is also pretty straightforward, right? Crop, scale, and tilts. So I'm going to go delete the transform I did here before. Another useful thing is actually distort. So let's say I had footage, I don't know, that was like this small or something. Let me just delete this for now. You'd say that like the footage was this small, or like just barely not the right size, right? Let's say we had something like, I don't know, this, right? So there's still a bit of black space around it. It's got a weird resolution. If you just hit distort, it'll distort to where you have this box. And by the way, whenever you have a transform on, you can just use this box here to do, the edits themselves. And you can see I can drag it out to like a neat resolution, whatever I want. You could also manually change the values. So if I want the X to be 0, the Y to be 0, and I want, 1920 by 1080, because that was the original footage. Now I can just set it back like that. Somewhere in here, there's also a reset to default, but what I normally do to reset to default is just delete the thing and then add it back in, because it's easier to reset things that way. But yeah, that's the transform thing. This is like 90% of your edits, right? Rotating things, changing opacity, changing size, like kind of moving stuff around. This is actually useful for moving stuff as well. If I had a test image, which I can just pull one up real quick, then I could go show that off as well. Alright, so let me go to here. Wrong folder. Alright, so for example, I just drag in this little PNG here. And to have him move, we just do transform. First off, at the start, I want him to be a bit smaller, so I just drag him down a little bit, move him like here. And let's say I want to move him to the other side at the end of this, so I could do this, add another keyframe, literally just drag and drop him to the end. And now you'll see, because of how keyframes work, he'll slowly, at a very stable pace, make his way across. But let's say I don't want that. Let's say I want him to quickly go, halfway across the screen like this. So I add another keyframe. And then for the rest of it, go really slow across the rest, right? Let's say I even want him to go up a little bit, make like a little upside down V. Now I can do that. Right? He goes fast and he goes slower all the way across. Very, very simple how keyframes work like that. Then the other thing is crop, scale, and tilt. Sometimes, there's things in the footage you don't want to see. So let's say I didn't want to see the entire right side of the screen. You can just slowly drag this out, or just type in a value if you want to go for specific values, and just kind of get rid of footage you don't want. Right, so there you go. I want to get rid of half of that. I want to get rid of a bit off the top. Right, you can scale it up and down here. I wouldn't really recommend doing it through this. I generally use the transform tool for scaling, but this can be useful. If I want to, I don't know, scale things in a weird way, I can do that. If I want to tilt things, I really don't know what tilt does. I've never used this before, but there's that as well. And that's something you can do. Now my footage is like super awful and only partially there, and the guy's just gonna go move across it, right? So that's all those things. I don't even know why this is favorited, to be honest. These are like the main things I use for editing. Transform, crop, and volume, and all the different keyframes. If I go back to here, into the effects category in the main section, sometimes I look up specific things like Chroma key to go make things, you know, if you have like a green screen, that's a useful one, but you can just look up how to do that on your own. Right, there's other things you can use here. There's a ton of things. Chances are, whatever you might need, there's something here for it. But for me, you know, muting stuff is just as simple as going to volume, adding it to the thing, and dragging it to the bottom. At -100, it's muted, right? So you don't have to think about it. Right? If I wanna make something smaller, I pull on the transform, make it smaller. If I want to crop something, I crop something. Right? It's all pretty straightforward. This is 90% of the video editing that I've had to do as a YouTuber. Here's the only last thing that I can really think of is adding text. So to do that, go on the top left here, hit the drop down, hit add title clip. You can pick your font, whatever font you like to use, and just click somewhere. And now you can write things, you know, you can write like, you know, test. I can drag that somewhere. I can even add more than one thing of text to here. I can change, you know, the color on this one specifically. I can change it to like 40 size, and I can even change it to like, I don't know, impact. Alright, so we have a different font, smaller size, and it's a different part of the screen, and you'll see it'll be there. Normally it shows like this, but if you hit show background, it'll show the actual background, like what the actual video is at that point that you have highlighted in the timeline. There's many things you can change here. You can add something called a typewriter effect I never use. The text align's useful sometimes. I generally have an outline of 8 that is black. You can even add a shadow, a gradient, whatever you want to do. And then there's also these 3 tabs I've never touched. There's like so many things in kdenlive I've never had to use video editing-wise because I just don't do crazy edits. But if I hit create text, you'll see it'll make a thing here called text. If I drag it in, it's literally just an image with those things. Right? If I let it play, like they're not going to move anywhere, they're not going to do anything. I can of course use transform to make them do things, right? So I can make it so like they do like a flip by making it go from rotation 0 to, you know, 360. Right, now the text is going to like rotate around like a clock. Right, and it does both of them because they're both in one. If I want both these separately, first off, you can double click to go back in and edit it. And by double clicking on anything, you could change it. So I could say like, you know, test 2. If you press enter, you can do like a new line and just stuff like that. I could even delete this one if I just press the delete key. That's gone now. We could add it back in. Go just like added, put that back in, and drag that down over here. Very, very easy to use. Very, very easy to mess around with. Yeah, very easy kind of text user. And yeah, I think that's most of the editing related stuff that you'll ever really need to make most YouTube videos. That really is it. You know, cropping footage, having stuff move across the screen, having stuff fade in, having stuff fade out. Like that's really 99% of what you need. You don't really have to even access most of these other menus, but I guess they can be useful if you want to streamline stuff even more, which I've never needed. And the last thing you want to do is, well, now I've got my project. Let's say this is your final render. Let's just also, if you're between stuff and there's just a bunch of empty space, you can right click and remove space, and it'll just bring stuff together for you in all the tracks. But you'll notice right there, if I press Ctrl Z, which just like anything undoes, you can see when I did remove space, it didn't do it everywhere because the stuff up here didn't move alongside it. If you remove space in all tracks, then it all goes together, and now these beautiful edits I've made will stay where I want them to stay. But let's say we were done here. We just hit project, render, and then for you guys, I don't remember even where it starts with its render, but this is very important. This is what you're going to use to render. In hardware accelerated experimental, I used like an edit of an NVEC H.264, which is tied to NVIDIA cards, and I have a little bit of customized stuff there. I found that these settings work best, and you might not see the stuff on the right here, and that's because you need to hit the more options button. I use all my threads when I render. That's the main change I made. Everything else, like the quality and all that is about the same. That's all fine. I don't even know what the default was that I used before, but I think it was just under generic. Oh yeah. I had something called MP4 Fast, which was just this MP4 H.264 thing with the max threads. And in Coder, you can mess with these settings. If stuff looks wrong, if the quality looks off, you know, custom quality, you can max it out to 100% quality or whatever. Doesn't really matter too much. You can also change things down here, but I really haven't changed anything here, I don't think. Like, most of the time it ends up fine. And then whenever you have things the way you want them, you can first off change the name of your file here. So you could do like, you know, test file, and you can change where it renders by hitting this little thing right here. And it'll pop up with, you know, a place to put stuff. So I could say, you know, I want to put in the desktop and I want to call it, I know, test3.mp4. And you can see, right, desktop test3.mp4, pretty cut and dry. And then, yeah, you just hit render to file, and like any other video editor, it'll slowly start rendering the file, or quickly, depending on how good your computer is. Gives like a rough estimate. Generally, if you render stuff that's under half an hour without like 50 video tracks, I've found that the estimate is actually mostly correct. But you know, sometimes if you go past that, or you feel a lot of video tracks, the render, you know, estimate isn't exactly exact. But yeah, that's everything I've pretty much done in kdenlive for the last like 3, 4, 5 years of editing with it. Hopefully you found this useful, and if you did, make sure you leave a comment saying thank you or something, so I know that somebody at least found this useful. Or if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below and I can try to help you out. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.